What would you do if your billionaire husband disappeared from your life for 5 long months? And on your birthday, the only person who showed up was someone you never expected. Watch as this emotional story unfolds, a tale of loneliness, betrayal, and one unexpected selfie that turned her entire world upside down. The Manhattan skyline shimmered under the soft glow of early autumn. The late afternoon sun turned the tall glass towers into sheets of gold, each window reflecting the pulse of the city below. Yellow cabs weaving through traffic, street vendors shouting over the hum of pedestrians, the distant rumble of the subway echoing through the concrete veins of New York. From the top floor of the Hudson Tower, the city looked alive, untamed, brilliant, unstoppable. Yet Evelyn Lawson felt like a ghost inside it. The penthouse she shared with her husband, Damian Hudson, was immaculate and breathtaking. A designer's masterpiece with polished marble floors, velvet drapes, and walls adorned with contemporary art. But for all its perfection, it was painfully silent. It had been 5 months since their wedding. 5 long, quiet, hollow months. Evelyn stood near the floor-to-ceiling window, her reflection framed against the golden skyline. From this height, she could see the expanse of Central Park, the glimmer of the Hudson River, and the chaos of the city streets, all of it vivid, alive, and full of stories. And yet, in this vast apartment, the only story was one of loneliness. She walked slowly through the open living room, her fingertips trailing along the marble countertop and the edge of the oak dining table. Every surface gleamed. Every item, from the imported crystal vases to the sleek silver-framed photos of the Hudson family, was positioned with mathematical precision. Her husband's mother, Helena Hudson, had made sure of that. Helena had orchestrated everything. The engagement, the lavish wedding at the Plaza Hotel, the press coverage that painted Evelyn as the lucky new Mrs. Hudson. But behind every compliment and champagne toast, Evelyn had sensed the same unspoken truth. This marriage wasn't born of love. It was a business arrangement wrapped in diamonds and designer lace. She remembered the night of their wedding as clearly as if it were yesterday. The crystal chandeliers, the sound of violins, the approving whispers of New York's elite. She remembered how Damian had stood beside her at the altar, immaculate in his tailored suit, every move precise and controlled. But his eyes had never softened. Not once. She had smiled, of course. She always did. But that night, as the world toasted to their happily ever after, Evelyn had felt the first quiet ache of disconnection, a warning of the emptiness to come. Even their honeymoon had been an illusion. The Maldives, turquoise waters, white sand, candlelit dinners, everything she'd ever dreamed of. But while she had stood barefoot on the balcony, watching the sunset bleed into the sea, Damian had sat behind his laptop, his attention chained to glowing spreadsheets and endless calls. "Just one more meeting," he'd say, voice calm, eyes never leaving the screen. By the 3rd day, she stopped asking. They returned to New York, and the pattern deepened. Damian would leave early, return late, and exist beside her rather than with her. Their conversations became fragments, polite, efficient, and forgettable. He had mastered the art of presence without participation. The staff at Hudson Holdings, his empire of technology, real estate, and finance, whispered about his obsession with work. One of his assistants had once joked, "Mr. Hudson's only true marriage is to his schedule." Evelyn had smiled when she overheard it, but later that night, she cried quietly into her pillow. Her journal became her closest companion, a slim leather-bound notebook tucked in the drawer beside her bed. Each page was filled with her thoughts, her fears, and her longing. She wrote about empty dinners and sleepless nights. She wrote about the way she stared at the clock, waiting for him to walk through the door. She wrote about the love she kept trying to feel but could never find. Then came her birthday. That morning, she awoke with something fragile and dangerous, hope. Damian had called the night before, his voice unusually soft. "I'll be home early tomorrow," he'd promised. "Dinner together. Just us." And though she'd learned not to trust his words, she couldn't help it. Her heart believed him. She spent the day preparing. Candles lined the shelves, casting a warm amber glow across the penthouse. Soft jazz floated from the speakers. The scent of rosemary and garlic filled the air as she cooked his favorite meal, lemon herb chicken with roasted potatoes. She wore a deep emerald dress, the one he had once said looked perfect on you. Her hair fell in loose waves over her shoulders, and her makeup was subtle but elegant. As dusk turned to night, she lit the final candle and glanced at the clock. 7, then 8, then 9. Each hour stretched longer than the last. Finally, her phone buzzed. A text from Damien. "I'm sorry, love. Stuck in a meeting. Sending you something special." Her hands trembled as she read the words. She forced a smile, the kind people wear when their hearts break quietly. Minutes later, the doorbell rang. A young delivery man stood there, holding a bouquet of white lilies and a cake box. "For Mrs. Hudson," he said, avoiding her eyes as though he could sense the ache beneath her calm exterior. She took the gifts with a faint thank you. When she turned to close the door, she hesitated. The silence in the apartment pressed against her like a weight. The candles flickered, mocking her with their warm glow. The delivery man, Liam, his name tag read, lingered awkwardly. He looked like he was about to leave, but something in her expression must have stopped him. "Would you?" Her voice came out softer than she intended. "Would you like to join me for dinner?" Liam blinked. "Ma'am, I made too much food," she said, trying to sound casual. "And it feels strange to eat alone on my birthday." He hesitated, clearly unsure whether this was appropriate. But her tone, polite, tired, almost pleading, left him no room to refuse. So he stepped inside. They sat at the long dining table meant for 12, the flicker of candlelight softening the space that had once felt like a museum. Evelyn served the food, pouring wine into crystal glasses. For the first time in months, someone sat across from her. Someone who looked her in the eye. Their conversation began awkwardly but soon turned gentle. About the city, about work, about small things that didn't hurt to say out loud. Liam laughed easily, and the sound filled the room like sunlight after rain. Evelyn found herself smiling, really smiling. It wasn't attraction. It was connection, something she'd almost forgotten how to feel. After dinner, as he prepared to leave, she paused. "Wait," she said suddenly, grabbing her phone. "Let's take a picture. For the memory." He laughed. "Are you sure?" "Yes." She lifted the phone, angled it toward them, and pressed the button. Click. The camera flashed, capturing her bright smile, his friendly grin, and the faint gleam of the city lights behind them. When Liam left, she sat back at the table, scrolling through her phone. The photo made her heart ache. She opened her social media app, typed a caption, and hit post. "Even on my birthday, my billionaire husband didn't show up, but at least someone did." It was meant to be a joke. A small rebellion. A truth wrapped in irony. She set her phone down and poured herself another glass of wine. The city outside buzzed with energy, but the penthouse remained silent, save for the soft hum of the air conditioning and the faint echo of her own heartbeat. Evelyn didn't know it then, but that single photo, one small, impulsive act of defiance, was about to change everything. The next morning dawned gray and heavy over New York City. Rain tapped gently against the tall windows of Hudson Tower, tracing thin silver lines down the glass before breaking into beads that vanished against the steel. Inside the 47th floor boardroom, Damien Hudson sat surrounded by executives, financial analysts, and glowing screens filled with quarterly projections. His voice was calm, precise, and unshakably professional. The voice of a man who had built empires out of logic and control. "Shift our investment focus to digital automation in Asia," he instructed, "and cut the marketing overhead by 12% before next quarter." A dozen people scribbled notes. No one dared to interrupt him. To most of the world, Damien was a marvel of discipline, a man who didn't waste time, words, or emotion. But beneath that surface was an exhaustion he refused to acknowledge. He hadn't slept properly in weeks. Every deal, every merger, every press release, it was all motion without meaning. He told himself he was building a future, but lately he couldn't remember what for. As the meeting drew to a close, his assistant, Clara, approached him quietly. "Sir, you might want to see this." She placed her tablet on the table. At first, Damien barely looked up. "Can it wait?" "I don't think it should," she replied carefully. The screen showed a familiar face, Evelyn's, glowing softly beneath a filter of candlelight. She was smiling, a genuine, unguarded smile, the kind he hadn't seen in months. Beside her sat a young man he didn't recognize, grinning shyly at the camera. Below the photo, thousands of comments poured in. Even billionaires' wives get lonely. He missed her birthday? Typical. She deserves better. Damien's heart dropped. He snatched the tablet from Clara's hand and read the caption. Even on my birthday, my billionaire husband didn't show up, but at least someone did. For the first time in years, his composure cracked. A flush crept up his neck. The boardroom seemed to close in on him. The laughter from the online comments echoed in his mind like a taunt. He stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. That will be all for today, he said tersely. His tone left no room for questions. The moment he left the boardroom, Clara followed cautiously. Mr. Hudson, it's trending everywhere. Twitter, Instagram, the business pages. The photo's gone viral. He turned sharply. Take it down. She hesitated. Sir, it's not on our platforms. It's hers. Damien froze. Evelyn never used her social media for anything personal. She was private, discreet. She'd avoided interviews, declined magazine features, refused to appear in the tabloids. But this post, this wasn't accidental. It was a message, and it was meant for him. He felt a strange, twisting ache in his chest, not anger at first, but something deeper. Guilt, maybe. Shame. He brushed past Clara, his mind spinning. By the time he reached his office, the rain outside had thickened into a storm. Lightning flashed against the skyline, painting the city in sudden bursts of white. He poured himself a glass of scotch, staring at the city below. All those lives moving in rhythm. All those people finding time for one another, while he had missed his wife's birthday. Again. The memory hit him with brutal clarity. Her voice the night before, soft and expectant. Dinner together. Just us. He had promised. And then he'd broken it. Damien set the glass down and grabbed his phone. He scrolled through their recent messages. Most were short and impersonal. Reminders, confirmations, empty check-ins. There were no real conversations. No warmth. He remembered her laughter once. The way it used to fill a room when they first met, before their relationship became a headline. He'd fallen for that sound, for her easy grace and quiet strength. But somewhere along the line, he'd traded it for silence. And now, that silence had turned into a scream. He grabbed his coat. Cancel my evening, he told Clara as he strode past her. Sir, you have the investor dinner at the... Cancel it, he snapped. The elevator doors slid shut behind him. The streets were slick and glistening by the time Damien's car pulled up to the Hudson penthouse. The driver held an umbrella, but Damien waved him off. The rain hit his face like a reckoning. He entered the building, his heart pounding. When he opened the door to their apartment, the familiar scent of rosemary and candle wax still lingered. The remnants of last night's dinner sat on the table, half-eaten chicken, an empty wine glass, a small cake box beside a cluster of wilted lilies. And there she was. Evelyn sat by the window, wearing a pale cashmere robe, her hair loosely tied. She didn't turn when he entered. Her phone rested on the coffee table, the screen still glowing faintly. Evelyn, he said quietly. She didn't answer. He took a few steps closer, his shoes clicking softly on the marble. I saw the photo. Now she turned. Her eyes met his, calm, unreadable. Of course you did. Everyone did. He flinched at the coolness in her tone. You embarrassed us, Evelyn. Do you realize what that post... Embarrassed you mean? She interrupted, her voice steady. Because I don't recall you worrying about how I felt when you missed my birthday. Or our anniversary. Or the nights you said you'd come home and never did. He opened his mouth, but the words caught in his throat. I wasn't trying to embarrass anyone, she continued. I just wanted to feel seen. Even for a moment. He stepped closer. By a stranger? Her gaze softened, but her voice didn't. By someone. Anyone who looked at me and actually noticed I was there. Damien's chest tightened. He wanted to defend himself, to explain the meetings, the pressure, the empire that never stopped demanding more. But all those justifications suddenly sounded small, hollow, pathetic. I never meant to hurt you, he said finally. Evelyn gave a faint, tired smile. You didn't have to mean it. You just had to do nothing. Her words sank deep. The rain outside drummed harder, as if echoing her pain. After a long silence, Damien sat across from her. For the first time in months, he looked at her, really looked. She seemed smaller somehow, more fragile, her warmth dimmed by months of neglect. I saw the comments, he murmured. People think you're unhappy. She gave a soft laugh, one that wasn't amusement but resignation. People are right, Damien. The sound of her honesty stung worse than anger. He leaned back, rubbing his temples. I've been building something for us. For you, she cut in. You've been building something for you. And I've been here, building a life around your absence. Her words broke something in him. He looked up at her, rainlight flickering across his face. Tell me what to do. Evelyn hesitated, then shook her head. You can't fix this overnight. You can't just buy me something or plan a dinner and think it erases everything. I don't want to buy your forgiveness, he said quietly. Then what do you want? He stared at her for a long time. I want to try again. Properly this time. Evelyn sighed, exhaustion seeping into her expression. Damien, you're good at making promises. I just don't know if you're capable of keeping them. He didn't argue. There was nothing to say. She stood, moving toward the hallway. Before disappearing into the bedroom, she paused. If you really mean that, if you truly want to try, then start by being here. Not in body, not in name, but in heart. Then she closed the door behind her, leaving him standing alone in the soft echo of her words. Damien stayed there for a long while, listening to the rain and the fading hum of the city below. Somewhere on the table, her phone buzzed. Another wave of notifications from the photo that had gone viral. He picked it up, stared at her smiling face on the screen, and felt the weight of everything he'd lost pressing down on him. He realized then that what he feared most wasn't the scandal. It was the possibility that she'd already stopped waiting for him to change. And for the first time in his life, Damien Hudson didn't know how to fix what he'd broken. The morning after the confrontation, Evelyn Lawson woke to the sound of rain easing into silence. The storm that had swept over Manhattan through the night had left the city washed and gleaming. Sunlight now spilled between the clouds, painting the skyline with streaks of gold and silver. But the beauty outside didn't reach her heart. She sat up slowly, her head heavy, her body aching from the restless night. Damien's side of the bed was untouched, the sheets smooth, undisturbed, a quiet reminder that even after their talk, he hadn't come to bed. For a moment, she wondered if he had left for work without saying a word. It would be like him, to hide behind silence when faced with pain he didn't know how to handle. As she swung her legs off the bed, she noticed something on the nightstand. A single white envelope. Her name, Evelyn, written in his handwriting. Clean. Careful. Hesitant. She stared at it for a long moment before tearing it open. Inside was a folded note and a small silver keycard. Meet me on the rooftop at 7 p.m. No staff. No phones. Just us. Damien. For reasons she couldn't explain, her heart skipped a beat. Part of her wanted to ignore it, to stay home, to curl up with a book, to prove that she was done waiting for him. But another part, quiet and persistent, whispered that maybe, just maybe, he meant it this time. She spent the day trying not to think about it, browsing her favorite bookstore on Fifth Avenue, walking through Central Park, sipping coffee at a small corner cafe. But every time she checked the time, her pulse quickened. By 6:30, she found herself standing in front of the mirror, smoothing her hair. She chose a soft satin dress the color of dusk, not too formal, not too deliberate, but quietly elegant. When she caught her reflection, she saw traces of the woman she used to be, hopeful, uncertain, alive. She took the private elevator to the rooftop. The doors slid open with a gentle chime, and for a moment, she forgot to breathe. The rooftop of Hudson Tower, normally cold, empty, and reserved for corporate events, had been transformed. String lights draped across the terrace, glowing like suspended stars. A round table sat beneath a canopy of white roses and ivy, set for two. Candles flickered in the soft evening breeze, their light reflecting off crystal glasses. The scent of fresh rain mingled with the faint aroma of lavender. And there he was, Damien Hudson, standing near the railing, watching the city below. He wasn't in a suit tonight. He wore a simple white shirt, sleeves rolled up, his tie gone, the wind tugging gently at his hair. When he turned, there was something unfamiliar in his eyes, vulnerability. "Evelyn," he said quietly, almost uncertainly. She hesitated near the doorway, clutching the edge of her shawl. "You didn't have to do this." "I know," he replied, "but I wanted to." They stood there in silence for a moment, the city's hum far below them, the the fading sun casting long shadows between them. Then Damien gestured toward the table. "Dinner's getting cold." She smiled faintly and walked closer. The table was set with her favorite dishes: roasted salmon with lemon butter, grilled asparagus, and a bottle of Chardonnay she had once mentioned loving in passing. "Who helped you with this?" she asked softly, sitting down. "No one," he admitted. "I sent the staff home. I wanted to do something myself." That surprised her. Damien, the man who rarely lifted a finger for anything non-essential, had done this? As they began to eat, the awkwardness that had always existed between them lingered like a fragile mist. But slowly, with each shared glance, each hesitant word, the air began to thaw. Evelyn broke the silence first. "You've never been good at this." He raised a brow. "At what?" "Talking. Feeling. Being here." He gave a small, self-deprecating laugh. "You're right. I've been good at everything except that." "Why?" she asked, her tone softer now. "Why is it so hard for you to just be with me?" He looked down at his plate, fingers tightening around his fork. "Because I don't know how," he admitted after a pause. "I was raised to win, to lead, to build. Not to feel. My father was the same. When he died, my mother made sure I understood that emotions were weaknesses, that success was the only way to survive." He glanced up, his eyes searching hers. "I thought if I could give you comfort, safety, everything money could buy, it would be enough." Evelyn's gaze softened. "I never wanted your money, Damien. I wanted you." The words hung in the air, trembling between them. He leaned back, exhaling slowly. "I know that now. I saw it in your eyes last night. And I realized, I've been building an empire for the future while destroying the only thing that mattered in the present." A tear escaped before Evelyn could stop it. She turned slightly, embarrassed, wiping it quickly. "Do you know how many nights I sat here wondering if I'd made a mistake marrying you?" His expression darkened. "I know. I wondered the same thing, not because of you, but because I didn't know how to deserve you." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The wind brushed gently through Evelyn's hair, carrying the faint sound of a distant saxophone from the street below. Then Damien stood and walked toward her side of the table. "May I?" he asked quietly. She nodded. He extended his hand, and she placed hers in it, hesitant, uncertain. He drew her up slowly, pulling her close until they were standing inches apart under the string lights. "I don't expect you to trust me again overnight," he murmured. "But I want to earn it. Not with words. With time." Her heartbeat fluttered against his chest. "And what if it's too late?" He shook his head. "If there's even a fraction of hope left in you, I'll fight for it." They stood there in silence, the city a glowing ocean beneath them. For the first time in months, Evelyn felt the wall between them begin to crack. Not from grand gestures, but from honesty. After a moment, Damien reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. She frowned. "I thought you said no phones." He smiled faintly. "Just one exception." He turned on the camera and held it up. "Let's take a photo." Evelyn laughed, startled. "You? Taking a selfie? Call it irony," he said, a small smile touching his lips. "The first one nearly ended us. Maybe this one will remind us how to begin again." He leaned close, his arm brushing hers. The screen flashed, capturing the two of them. No filters, no pretense, no perfect smiles. Just honesty. Afterward, he looked at the photo quietly. "No captions this time," he said. "Just us." She nodded, the corner of her mouth curving slightly. "Just us." They stood there until the lights of Manhattan flickered on one by one, the night stretching endlessly around them. When they finally sat down again, conversation came easier. They talked about their first meeting, about what went wrong, about small things that had been lost between work and silence. And when the evening ended, Damien didn't rush her or ask for forgiveness. He simply walked her to the elevator and said softly, "Thank you for coming." Evelyn smiled, the kind of smile that carried both sorrow and hope. "Thank you for trying." As the elevator doors closed, Damien stood there, staring at the city lights. For the first time in years, the empire he had built felt secondary. The real fight, he realized, had just begun, not for power but for love. And for Evelyn Lawson, it was the first night in a long time that didn't end in tears. She went to bed replaying his words, his eyes, his sincerity, not promises but possibilities. Winter came quietly to New York. The city shimmered under a veil of frost, streets glistening with melted snow, trees along Central Park draped in silver lights. The world outside seemed to rush endlessly, but inside the Hudson penthouse, time moved slower now. It had been 3 months since that night on the rooftop. 3 months since Damian Hudson had stopped living through his calendar and started living in his marriage. The change hadn't come overnight, but it was steady, real, and visible. The man who once buried himself in board meetings now came home before sunset. The husband who once texted his wife from the next room now sat beside her with no phone in sight. And the billionaire who once measured success in numbers had learned to measure it in moments. Laughter over breakfast, quiet walks at dawn, shared books, shared warmth. For the first time since their wedding, the penthouse felt like a home. Evelyn could feel it in the way the air no longer echoed with silence, but with the small, human sounds of life, Damian humming absently while brewing coffee, the clink of dishes in the kitchen, the murmur of conversation spilling from the living room. He wasn't perfect, far from it. There were still days when work called him away, when old habits whispered. But now he noticed. He made the effort. He came back. And that difference meant everything. One evening, she sat curled on the couch, flipping through her camera, the one Damian had surprised her with after dinner one night. "You used to talk about photography all the time," he'd said. "Maybe it's time you started again." And she had. Her days had become filled with light and color. Street photography, portraits of strangers, snapshots of life in motion. She'd even begun building an online portfolio, something that made her feel purposeful again. As she scrolled through her photos, she came across it, the rooftop picture. The one Damian had taken that night under the lights. It wasn't perfect, a bit blurry, the city behind them glowing unevenly, but it was real. Their smiles were soft, genuine. No filters, no masks. Just two people who had decided to try again. Her heart swelled. From the hallway came the faint sound of Damian's voice. "Evelyn." She turned as he walked in, still in his coat, hair slightly wet from the snow outside. "You're home early," she said, surprised. He smiled, that small, quiet smile that had begun replacing his old, guarded expression. "Board meeting ended faster than I expected. I figured you wouldn't mind some company." "Never," she said softly. He dropped onto the couch beside her, glancing at the camera in her hands. "You're still at it?" "Always," she teased. "You created a monster." He chuckled, reaching for her hand. "Good. I like this version of you, the one who smiles without pretending." She leaned into him, resting her head against his shoulder. "I like this version of you, too." He kissed her forehead gently. "How about we get away for a while?" She lifted her head. "Get away. Somewhere quiet. Just us. No phones, no meetings." She smiled, amused. "You? No meetings?" He grinned. "I'm evolving." The world looked different from the balcony of a Parisian apartment. The Eiffel Tower shimmered in the distance, lights sparkling against the night sky. Below, the streets of Montmartre pulsed with life. Artists sketching lovers, jazz spilling from open cafes, couples walking arm in arm through the cold. Evelyn stood wrapped in a wool coat, camera in hand, capturing it all. Behind her, Damian leaned against the doorway, watching her with quiet admiration. "You've taken about 200 photos tonight," he teased. "And every one of them is worth it," she said without looking back. He walked over and slipped his arms around her waist. "You know, I don't think I've ever seen you happier." She turned, her eyes glowing in the lamplight. "That's because I'm finally being seen." He didn't answer, he just held her tighter. The wind was warm, the sea stretched wide and blue beneath them. They stood on the terrace of a glass hotel overlooking the Arabian Gulf, the city's skyline glittering in the distance like molten gold. It was evening, and Damian had just finished telling her something that made her laugh until her eyes watered. "You're terrible at telling jokes," she said between giggles. "I'm getting better," he countered, mock-offended. "You laughed." "I laughed at you, not with you." He grinned. "I'll take it." She looked at him then, really looked. The man who once carried walls around him now smiled like someone learning to breathe for the first time. She reached out, brushing her fingers along his cheek. "You've changed." He caught her hand and kissed it. "You made me want to." The sun set over the Aegean Sea in hues of rose and amber. Whitewashed houses clung to the cliffs like scattered pearls, and the air smelled of salt and bougainvillea. The island glowed with quiet magic, far from the noise of New York, far from everything that had once divided them. Evelyn and Damien stood together on the balcony of their small villa, the sound of the sea below rhythmic and calm. She rested her hands on the railing, eyes on the horizon. Damien stood beside her, content in silence, a silence that now felt safe, not empty. Finally, she turned to him, her expression gentle but trembling. "There's something I need to tell you." His brow furrowed slightly. "What is it?" She hesitated, her fingers brushing his hand. "I went to the doctor before we left New York." He stilled. "Are you okay?" Her lips curved into a trembling smile. "I'm more than okay." A pause, then the truth slipped out, soft and life-changing. "Damien, I'm pregnant." For a moment, time stopped. The world, the sea, the wind, the fading sun, seemed to still around them. Damien stared at her, his eyes wide, his breath caught somewhere between disbelief and wonder. "You're serious?" he whispered. She nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. "I found out 2 weeks ago. I wanted to tell you in the right place." He exhaled, then laughed, a raw, joyful sound that startled even him. I don't know what to say." "Say you're happy," she murmured. He cupped her face in his hands, his voice breaking. "I'm more than happy. He stopped, unable to find the word big enough to hold what he felt. Then he pulled her close, pressing his forehead against hers. "Thank you," he whispered, "for not giving up on me, for giving me another chance, for this." Tears slipped down her cheeks as she smiled. "We both got a second chance, Damien. Not just you." They stood there, wrapped in each other, the sea stretching endless before them. Later that night, as the stars bloomed over the island and the soft sound of waves filled the air, Evelyn sat beside Damien on the balcony, her head resting on his shoulder. He held her hand, tracing circles on her palm, the same hand that had once trembled with frustration, now steady with peace. "This is what I wanted," she whispered. "What?" he asked softly. "Stillness. Love. You." He smiled, kissing her temple. "And this time you'll always have them." She lifted her camera from her lap and turned it toward them. "One last photo." He laughed. "Another selfie?" "The last one for a while," she said. "A new beginning." The flash captured them, her gentle smile, his soft laughter, the sea glowing behind them. A picture not of perfection, but of healing. And in that moment, as the stars shimmered over Santorini and the ocean whispered below, Evelyn realized something simple but profound. Love wasn't about grand gestures or promises spoken under chandeliers. It was about choosing each other, every day in small and quiet ways. And for once, she knew Damien Hudson would keep choosing her. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please like, share, and subscribe to Boundless Echoes for more interesting stories. We really appreciate your support. Comment where you are watching from, so we can give you a shout out. See you in our next video.